Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your attendance this afternoon. First of all, we're going to go around and introduce ourselves on the off chance that there might be somebody watching us on telly, as it were. So I'll start with myself, and then I'm going to go right, and then carry on round the room. When you, particularly the officers, when you introduce yourself, could you tell the public and us what your role is, please? So I'll just let Sophie, I think it's Sophie, is it Sophie under there? I'll just let Sophie get sat down and then we'll do it. I have to confess that some stage during this afternoon, I will get the sequence wrong. It's brain, finger, button. Quite often I miss one of those stages out, so you'll have to forgive me. Okay. You ready, Sophie? You okay? Right, I'm Councillor McRooney, and I have the pleasure of chairing this Scrutiny Committee. And John, that way. We're going that way.
Sorry, I thought you were about to say something about me. John Turner, Democratic Services.
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Mike Chaplin, representing Salvey Ward.
Hello, I'm Sophie Wilson, and I'm the councillor for Park and Arbourthorne Ward.
Hello everybody, I'm Carly Speechley, Director of Children and Families for Sheffield City Council.
Hello, I'm Shelley Hemsley. I'm Sheffield District Commander for the Police.
Hello, I'm Donna Taylor. I'm the Assistant Director for Quality Assurance and Involvement Service in Carly's part of the world.
Hi, I'm Tina Gilbert. I'm the Partnership Manager in Sheffield for the Adults and Children's Safeguarding Partnerships.
Hi, Dan White, Head of Health and Targeted Services in the new Community Youth Services within the Communities Directorate.
I'm Councillor Richard Shaw. I'm Councillor for Beecham and Greenhill.
Hi, I'm Cliff Woodcraft, Councillor for Fulwood.
I'm Councillor Anne Whitaker for West Ecclesfield Ward.
My name is Maroof Ralph. I'm the Councillor for Netheredge and Sharrow and also the Deputy Chair.
Alice Riddell, Health Watch Sheffield. Is that myself? I'm Alice Nicholson, Policy Support Officer for this committee.
Right, that went quite well. Final two things in terms of housekeeping. There shouldn't be an alarm test this afternoon, fire alarm test, so if it goes off, it's a real one. And we need to get out of the building as quickly but orderly as possible. 2 ways out, one there and one there. And the toilets, there's men's toilets through there and men's and women's through that door. So if you need them, someone will help you find them. Okay? Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, I've received apologies from Councillors Anne Murphy, Anne Woolhouse and Kelton Rivers.
Have we got any from the officer side? I was expecting possibly are you the new chair of?
Our new chair hasn't started yet, so David retired in November, so Shelley Hemsley is presenting this afternoon.
Right, that explains that. Thank you very much. And we have no subs? No. I can't think of, there is no reason to exclude the press and public. Unfortunately, we haven't got anybody here anyway, although they may be watching. Declarations of interest on today's agenda. Anyone? Right. minutes next time. They're quite lengthy, but largely on one subject matter or two combined subject matters. So what I'm going to do is, can we agree them as a totality, as something approaching a reasonable record of what happened last time? Somebody talk to me, please. It would be really
Happy with
nice.
that, yeah.
It gets lonely up here. You are?
I am happy with the minutes.
You're okay with them? Can I have a seconder for that? Sam, thank you very much. And what I will do now is go through them page by page for matters arising. And I have scribbled a note or two. So I'm looking at page 9. Okay? We have on 4.1, we have the Youth Cabinet response on today's agenda, so we have made contact with them. The early help service we're hoping to have on a future agenda, well, the next and possibly last agenda of this meeting. And I just wondered if, Alice, you wouldn't mind explaining what happened to the meeting that I promised the adopters that were here last time, if please.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. What happened is it hasn't happened, but that's not a big issue in terms of we need to now make that happen. Just for your information, talking to Paul Dempsey, there was a meeting arranged where some of the adopters did talk through some of the issues around the Regional Adoption Agency, but that was instigated by the service, who were very keen to pick up on some of the issues from what I understand. I'm sure Carly can tell me if I've got that wrong. But what's very clear also, and Paul is very supportive of this, Paul Dempsey, is that that session that you promised should happen, and that we'll make that happen as soon as we can in the next sort of few weeks, month.
It was well intended, but it did sort of muddy the waters a bit, the sort of early premature meeting, and I was confused and straggled for a few days until I found out what was actually going on. But we will have that meeting. We were asked to postpone it for a little while because of the Christmas and New Year period, but now we're in the process of setting it up. So there we go. Right. Anybody else? Anything else on 10? Because most of this set of minutes are a record of the question and answer session. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, anybody? 20 and 21. Right. Okay. We are now on to item 6. Questions. Have we had any submitted at all, Alice? So there's none submitted and there's nobody here to ask them, so that's that. Item 7, Sheffield Children's Safeguarding Partnership. I'm assuming this is going to be a combined presentation. Away you go.
Chair, thank you. I'll start on behalf of the partners that are here today. You'll be aware that working together 2018 requires us to write statutorily an annual report, which is what you're here to ask questions today. And we're here talking about the report from April 2020 to March 2021. I think predominantly there's 4 key things that I want to say. First of all, clearly we were in the year that was very highly impacted by COVID during April 20 to March 2021. What that did do to us as a partnership, it required us to work differently and virtually in some ways. Now, clearly, in regards to what we need to do around safeguarding and well-being for children, all of the partnership was still very much operational and dealing with children and issues face-to-face. But what we were able to do in order to innovate was some of the meetings that we're required to hold, and also the training that we are required to do. We were able to do that virtually. And one thing that we have noted, and we will probably continue as a partnership as we move on, is around that virtual engagement for training, because we got a really good uptake from that from across the partnership with practitioners. The second thing from my perspective is obviously we're now in our new partnership arrangements. So the Wood Review recommended that we went from the old arrangements, which was you will have traditionally known as a safeguarding board, to new safeguarding arrangements, putting the three specific partners on a statutory footing. Hence why I'm here today, because that's the police, the local authority and the CCG. And I've got the pleasure of presenting for us all here. It's fair to say it's probably the second report that we've done under the new arrangements, so it will be interesting to get your feedback around how we might go about writing that next time around. And you're right, Chair. Unfortunately, David Ashcroft can't be with us today. He's the outgoing independent chair for both the children's arrangements and the adults arrangements. So it'd be remiss of me to not put on record our thanks for his support and leadership over the last 3 years that he's been with us. And also to let you know, I think you're already aware, we've been through a recruitment for a new independent chair who will hopefully be starting in April this coming year. And the other thing really for me to say before inviting any questions is, I know that this meeting was due to be held in November and we had to make arrangements at that time, and sadly it's meant that it's been slightly delayed. I know that you are keen to ensure that we do that sooner next time around on the when we've published the report. And last but not least, I suppose the three priorities that held true through this safeguarding annual report and still hold true with the safeguarding partnership in relation to children are our priorities around neglect, around contextual safeguarding, and also the emotional and mental health and well-being of children in the city. And I think that's probably enough from me, Chair, if that's all right.
What about your colleagues? Have they got anything to add? Don't be afraid, but
Put the speaker on.
I mean, I don't think there's anything to add, but we're very happy to take questions in relation to specific aspects of the report, if that's helpful.
Just a couple of things. I'd like to add our thanks to the retiring chair, to yours from this committee, and if we can pass that on or register it somewhere, I think that's the right and proper thing to do. And it would be nice to find a way of meeting the new one earlier than next year's annual report, if you know what I mean. It would be better. I don't want to. It would seem a bit odd that the first time you meet somebody is like 12 months after they've got the job. So we need to find a way of getting to know that person prior. Okay, so questions, please. Cliff.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive report. It is very comprehensive, and I must say I found it a little bit mind-boggling because there was so much in it. What is there in there that you would say, this is what you need to be concerned about? what worries you? It's not all hunky-dory, is it? There are things that that you would want us to be thinking about, I'm sure.
So, as Shelley said, there are three priorities in there. So one is around neglect and our approach to assessing the needs of those children that are potentially suffering neglect, and particularly the cumulative impact of neglect. So quite often neglect is not categorised by one incident. It is accumulation of living conditions generally for children, and our ability to assess that cumulative impact rather than just taking things on one incident. And we've got a lot of work going on across the whole workforce around training the workforce to spot the signs of that neglect and be able to assess that cumulative impact. So I think in terms of your role as corporate parents, in the widest sense, it's about how perhaps we support you to gain an understanding of that. Contextual safeguarding, again, the same. You know, how do we spot the early signs of children that may be at risk of contextual safeguarding? And when I say contextual safeguarding, you'll see it in the information, children that are going missing, children that are being exploited either criminally or sexually, children who are displaying sexually harmful behaviour, youth violence, generally teen violence, but youth violence. How do we alert you as corporate parents to the signs that they are emerging problems or indeed entrenched problems? And the other one is around how do we identify at the early stage children and young people that might be needing support. So certainly in your roles, how do you identify those children and young people that at the earliest opportunity so that we are able to prevent problems escalating? So they're the things that I think I would want us to look out for in terms of the general population of children and young people. And then there are some specific requirements or specific help around the corporate parenting priorities, which are, we are corporate parents of about 680 children that are looked after on behalf of their parents as a local authority, and it's about your role in supporting the achievement of best outcomes for those children. So whatever they might be, successful in their education, thriving in terms of their health, being able to grow into successful adults and contribute, you know, so it's the general, how do you support the general priorities of the partnership, but then how do we harness your resources around that specific cohort of children and young people that are looked after by the local authority. They are the things that I would say we want to harness your ideas, resources, interventions around.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, one thing that did catch my eye was elective home education. I mean, schools, if they have difficult children, they sometimes drop out of school, don't they? And they end up in being home educated. Where are we with this? I mean, it's often, this often happens because, well, perhaps it happens. I mustn't accuse the schools of it. But if they're a problem for the school and it's going to damage their Ofsted results, which, you know, that they run scared of, it's an easy option, isn't it, for them, for the child to be home educated. Where are we with this?
I mean, I would agree with Cliff, because I think we've had it to this committee on 3 occasions now. I think and every time it's caused quite a significant amount of consternation in terms of the quality of the education that the children are getting and the environment in which some of them are being taught. And I don't think we've ever really felt at ease that was being dealt with successfully. I think that's it has caused a lot of disquiet amongst members.
I mean, you will know by my title, I'm not an education specialist, but I can give you a bit of information about this, and I can get more information to you. So what we saw, particularly as the pandemic arrived, we saw the elective home education numbers increase significantly. For all sorts of reasons, and not least because of parents' nervousness around their children being in school. That has reassuringly come back down to almost pre-pandemic levels. So we've got about just over 500 children in the city that are being elective home educated. It is, in part, one of the forms of exclusion I don't mean in the formal definition of the word, but in the wider sense of the word. And we do see amongst that cohort some children that are perhaps more difficult to manage in school, so children with education, health and care plans, for example. What we have done in the local authority throughout the pandemic is increased our capacity to work with those families where they are electively home educating. So we went from about 2 members of staff that were linking in around electively home education. We've now got 6. So we put an additional 4 staff into there, and they all link in with each of those families where the children are being home educated. Much more routine visiting, much more checking of what is the curriculum being offered to those children, and much more challenge where the curriculum is not appropriate or at an acceptable level, around reintegrating those children back into schools. So there is quite a lot of work going on around elective home education. But as I said, it is just one form of exclusion, and there are others where children are on school roll, but they're not attending, or they're in alternative provision. And I can get from Andrew Jones, who is my education director colleague, I can get you a more detailed report on that. But there is a lot of work going on around elective home education and inclusion generally. We published an inclusion strategy last year, and that is having some impact.
Yeah, thank you for that. Perhaps slightly off subject. There is a proposal, is there not, that's going through the House of Lords for a national register of children being home educated. Do you have any views on that?
I think it's only helpful to us if we get more powers around elective home education. So we don't have really any powers apart from checking the curriculum content for children. And as I said, we are doing that. The only other power that we've got really to intrude on family life is if we've got safeguarding concerns. So we do check, we do have a RAG rating system for those children in terms of making sure that they are seen, visible, safe. But we don't, a register in and of itself, because one, it's not the only form of exclusion in any case, there are many others, and it needs to be looked at in that context. But also without giving us authority over those families who are perfectly currently within their right to exercise that duty, that power to withdraw their children from school. Until we've got something that allows us to act, a register on its own is not going to be that helpful. Although nationally, clearly it will give a national picture of the issue, really. It will give us a national picture of how many children are electively home educated in the country at any one time.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been in contact with one of our constituents who has a fear over this this national register, and I think the fear is that there's going to be some sort of straitjacket that everyone's going to have to teach to the national curriculum at home, where it might not always be appropriate for that particular child. I mean, you know, it's a very sort of straitjacketing. I just wonder, do you have any views? You know, it's the danger of the national register, I think, isn't it, that it could result in a very narrow outlook, as perhaps has happened in our schools as well.
So I've got like an assistant on the mic.
Not my speciality.
I don't know that level of detail about it. I would have to get that from Andrew, because as I say, it's not my area of specialism. But clearly there are children that don't benefit from the national curriculum in its current form, which is why there are alternatives available. But I couldn't with any confidence give you the level of detail you're looking for, but I will find that out.
I'm going to make a suggestion actually for the next meeting, which Alice doesn't know that I'm going to say this. The next meeting in March is the last meeting of this particular scrutiny meeting committee, and I think probably the last scrutiny committees will be between now and May. What I'm suggesting in the March meeting is that we take a little time to consider some of the issues that we have the biggest concerns about, and ask the transition committees to have a look at the ones that we think might, as a sort of like a handover to the new system. I don't know how members feel about that, but because of the time constraints and the resource constraints, we never ever managed to deal with all of the issues that we'd like to. So I'd like to consider next time round a list we might want to say to the Transitions Committee that, would you mind thinking about having a look at these? What do people think about that? And that would be one of them, Cliff. Yep, I'm getting nods. I think I've just had a light bulb moment. Anybody else for questions, please? There must be more, there must be. Maroof.
Yeah, sorry, I've got quite a few, so whoever wants to answer or feels they're best placed to answer can. So the first question is, I do know on page 31 you've said the number of secondary schools that are outstanding. My question really is, how many of these secondary schools or primary schools rated outstanding have actually achieved outstanding status since 2012? Do you have any figures on that at all? Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So the next question is: would you agree that a school cannot continue to be outstanding if it has not been Ofsteded within the last 10 years? And what evidence is there to suggest that a school is outstanding if it has not been Ofsteded in the last 10 years?
Again, not my area of specialism, but we do partner with commission Learn Sheffield as our school improvement partner. And I do know that organisation does a sort of assessment, if you like, of each school in terms of where they are, and based on the assessment, they will put, and I don't know whether they do a grade, but they certainly will rate whether they think that school is performing well or there are areas of strong concern. I'm not sure whether that information is published. I would need to check that. I don't think it is. But I will check that. I can check that out.
All right, not a problem. Moving on to the next question. So, just in regards to what Cliff said a bit ago about teaching to the national curriculum, and I can totally understand why his constituents, as with my constituents, would be concerned about having to teach the national curriculum. Do you agree that it's unfair for parents who do homeschool their children to have to teach national curriculum when 81 schools in Sheffield do not have to teach to the national curriculum?
Again, not my area of specialism. As far as I understand it, I don't think there is an expectation that parents teach the full national curriculum. I think there is an expectation around some core subjects, including English and maths. But again, I would need to check that out. Without an education representative here, and I'm sorry that we haven't got an education representative here, I would be making some of it up if I didn't. But I don't think that is the expectation. Certainly from a social care perspective, when we've got children who are home educated, they aren't being asked to it. Those parents aren't being asked to teach the full range of the national curriculum, but they are being asked to teach particularly English and maths in terms of those core subjects.
Not a problem. My next question is specifically related to social care. So we have seen many cases nationally of children suffering extreme neglect, with a number having died. What are you doing to ensure there are no children in Sheffield under similar circumstances?
So thank you for asking me a question I might know the answer to first. So we've got lots of work that is ongoing in terms of that early identification. So I talked to you earlier about the work that we're doing around neglect, but also our priority around early intervention and prevention. So working with the workforce generally around in universal providers, schools, nurseries, GPs, health visitors, etc. Those services that routinely see children because of just universally, so all children. So we are working closely around, and we do that through the Safeguarding Partnership, as well as doing it as a local authority training, around how do colleagues across the workforce in the system identify at the earliest opportunity signs that families are in trouble, that they need additional support, and importantly any signs of neglect. We're quite lucky in Sheffield. We spend about £15 million currently on early intervention services just in the local authority, so we've protected a lot of our early intervention services so that children and families do get that support, that timely support when they need it and before problems escalate. Clearly, where problems do escalate, we will, and the threshold is met for a Section 17 of the Children Act, which is child in need, or Section 47 of the Children Act, which is child protection, so children at risk of immediate harm, we will allocate social workers and make sure that children are safeguarded. And where, in extreme circumstances, we will remove children from their parents. So we quality assure our work with as part of the partnership and as a local authority, and we do some of that through the Section 11 audits. So we check our work, we look at our data, we talk to children and families, we talk to schools, we triangulate our information. I cannot ever say that would not happen here, but we're also externally regulated by Ofsted, who have judged us to be good. They came in November last year, found our services to still remain effective. So there's a lot of things we do. So we provide lots of services. We provide training to identify children and families as early as we can, and we have robust assurance mechanisms in place to try and ensure that the services we provide to families is good and is effective in keeping children safe and supported. Do you want to add anything about the neglect strategy?
Yeah, so just for some further assurance in relation to this, South Yorkshire Police has embarked on a force-wide training around neglect and spotting the signs early across our workforce. It's excellent training, and I can say that because I went on it on Monday. So all of our frontline police officers, police staff like PCSOs in the community are all receiving training on neglect, the trauma that neglect can have in relation to children and how that may affect them as they transition into adulthood, and also in terms of understanding the signs and being able to evidence it, to work well with our partners in social care, where we believe that either children need some support and assistance, the family do, or indeed it meets a threshold for us to think about using our emergency powers, because the police have police protection powers that are emergency powers that can be used there and then. So I think, in terms of this being a priority for the Safeguarding Partnership, and actually that training that South Yorkshire Police is undergoing has been in partnership with social care across the county, but also the NSPCC. So I think like Carly says, I think we can't always say that will definitely not happen here, but we're doing everything that we can to ensure that all practitioners, whatever role they may be or from whatever service, can spot and report signs of concerns that they see within families. And clearly we have the safeguarding hub, so the local referral unit for the police sits within the safeguarding hub, where all referrals from all partners are triaged to understand what activity we need to do as a partnership together.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, just go back with what you were saying, Carly, and then I'll come back to the police. Can I just confirm you do make home visits, is that correct? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I didn't quite catch that, that's not a problem. And on to police. So, have you got any figures on the frequency of children moving into county lines? And what training are you providing schools to help them understand the dangers of county lines and what signs to look out for in children that might be moving into county lines?
So we do have, and I can't tell you immediately now because I would be doing it off the top of my head. And it's actually managed within the partnership by the local authority. There is now an exploitation tracker. So where we get information or intelligence around young people that may be risk of exploitation, there is a professionals meeting where we look at those circumstances around that young person or child to understand what risk there is in relation to them, and then that there would be a safety plan or a plan put in place around how we might manage that young person to try and lessen any risk that they may either put themselves in or others put them in. I can't tell you the numbers of the children that we've got through that process at the moment. In terms of county lines, you're absolutely right to highlight that as an issue of concern. We do know that Sheffield is both an importer and an exporter of county lines, and certainly what we are doing through our neighbourhood teams is looking at that engagement with schools in order to teach the schools and teachers and other professionals to spot the signs of children who may be exploited. I know that that's been particularly successful through the Neighbourhood Action Group, or whatever that group is going to be called in the future, in the Sharon Nether Edge area, and there's been certainly some really good engagement with schools and the professionals there, which hopefully is can be rolled out wider across the city. Now we've got that proof of concept through that group.
Just one last question on county lines, sorry. Do you find children from certain backgrounds are more attracted to county lines than others? Or is it across the board?
I don't think it would be fair for me to make a comment in terms of that. What we can say is that children that might be neglected, or that they might find that they need something else in their lives that's not being delivered either from their family, friends, educational setting, that might get drawn into and attracted to county lines from the point of view of clearly it can be lucrative for young people, which is exactly why we want to train education settings to spot the signs of children turning up with expensive clothing or equipment that you wouldn't expect them necessarily to have. So yeah, I can't say that there's children from a certain background. I think it can be cross-cutting, really.
No problem, thank you. I'll come back in later.
I think one thing that has become rather obvious this afternoon is that we need to proofread the paperwork and have a closer look at which officers might be needed to come, because you can guarantee if there's reference to educational attainment, somebody will ask a question on educational issues. So I think, and that's not just this afternoon, but I think to a lot of other papers as well. Somebody, the author perhaps, should proofread it and work out which officers need to come along, because it can be a little bit frustrating when you've, read through umpteen pages, thought, I've got a question there, and then you can't have it answered.
I will make sure that we do get answers, though, Chair.
I know you will. I know you will, but I think the point's a fair one, Carly. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. My question's about, it's on page 52 of the pack, but it's about the child death overview panel. It says that 60% of deaths were reviewed within 12 months, 49% between 6 to 12 months. Gives a comparison with the national figure. How does it compare with other core cities? And also, for that 6 to 12 months, is there anything that this authority should be doing to reduce that time that it takes for a review to happen? Is there anything, or is that time as good as it's going to get?
I think it's very variable because a lot of them will depend on inquests or the cause of death. So often the delays are due to waiting for information that will allow the review to take place. So, and that will vary across a year. So I think it would be quite hard to say that we could make an improvement on that because it would depend on the cause of deaths.
Right. But there's nothing that you're aware of that, internally within the authority that could be, that could be improved to, reduce any delays on our part, as it were.
Mainly the delays will be health related. It will not be to do with the local authority.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that you, Richard?
Well, it's just also, and because also how it compares with other core cities, because it gives a comparison nationally. But I think it'd be good to know, how Sheffield compares with other places like Sheffield.
That would be something that we would have to come back to you on. We are working regionally across South Yorkshire now to create a bigger footprint of cases, because as individual areas, the number of deaths is relatively small, thankfully. So we are working with the colleagues across South Yorkshire to bring the information together to get trend information and look at what themes are coming out of the information. But we could certainly go back and get information around the core cities.
Thank you. I think it just might be worth kind of including that in future reports, just because a national figure it can mask it off, gives too much of an average.
Okay, Richard. I mean, I would agree with that. There are instances in the report where it's helpful to have a comparison to the national situation, but conversely, it's unhelpful because it just distorts the figures. And I think perhaps a little bit more thought about which comparators we use would be, I think, would be helpful. Is that it, Richard? My chaplain. Brain, finger, button.
Are you all right, Chair? Yeah. Well, that's good to know. Oh dear. No, I shared your concerns about not having someone to represent to be able to put the education side across, given that it is referenced quite a lot in the report. So I will do the decent thing and ask Carly a question that's not about education, but is about, it's following up on an earlier colleague on safeguarding, and I mean it's good to know that Sheffield has a good rating from Ofsted. It's sad to know that there are several core cities around us that no longer have that rating, and for them it's slipped, or they've been struggling for a number of years. We know that in Sheffield we are facing a very severe budget round coming up this March. So while I welcome that all the way through the report, you've put a lot of what we will do next in on each of the different topics. My concern with safeguarding is, given the cuts in funding that we're going to have to make as a local authority, are we putting that safeguarding level at risk so that it could slip from good? Thank you.
So, my budget is currently £23 million overspent, and the expectation is that we will bring that back into line in the next financial year. So it's hugely challenging in terms of how we make those savings and maintain good services to children. So we've got a budget strategy that is it's predominantly around investing to save. So we've got currently we've got 9 children's homes. So so there's 2 areas of spend in my area. One is on staffing. So the more children we support, the more staff we need to keep caseloads at a reasonable level so that the quality of service we provide is good enough. And the other is on placements for looked after children. We are significantly overspending on placements for looked after children, and that is never more so than during this pandemic period. So what we know is that if we provide our own placements, we're not dependent on the market, and the market charge silly money for some of these placements, and 2, we provide a better quality of provision. So we are seeking capital investment through the local authority to build more of our own provision so that we can bring that placement budget down in line with, so we're currently spending 8 million more than we've got in the budget just on placements. So there's a big chunk of those savings are being done on an invest to save basis. So that's one part of it. The other thing that we're hoping to achieve through continued investment in earlier help, and as the pandemic works its way through, is a reduction in some of the demand. So a significant chunk of that overspend has been because we've had such peaks in demand. So we've got 9.2% increase in looked after children. So not only have we got the price of placements going up, we need more placements because we've got more children in care. And we've got more children in need and more children on child protection plans. So what we are hoping to see is that as things improve post-pandemic, and I know we're not post-pandemic yet, that demand will reduce and we'll be able to manage more at early help. We're also looking at some of our things like business support. So because we are working in a more agile way now, we're much more able to use technology. We are looking at other things that were previously done by people that can now be done through technology. So minute taking is a basic example. We used to have a minute taker. Actually, laptops now have a facility to record meetings and do a transcript. John, don't worry, your job is safe. Your job is safe. I thought earlier when we're at page 22, I thought that must take you an age. So we are looking at wherever possible not to reduce services to children, but we need a bit of a fair wind behind us in terms of some of this stuff as well, I will be honest.
Thank you for that, Carly.
Sam?
I've got 2 bits. So the first one was a comment, and I guess it's probably anecdotal at best and operational, so I'm not necessarily expecting that you respond. I think probably for the first 10 years of my career I was a youth worker and continue to manage a team of youth workers. And so I guess my only comment would be, I can't see now, my only comment would be around the safeguarding hub and my experience, and also other kind of charity and non-profits experience of actually putting information into there, and particularly perhaps a changeover since general data protection regulation. And so I just wanted to feed back that our experience has been, over the last several years at least, that quite often we'll give information that I think would probably trip the particular sections that are relevant, you know, to do with criminal grooming. I can't remember the exact terminology because I'm a stuffed shirt now rather than a youth worker. And quite often what we'll hear back is that we can't give it because we haven't got parental consent. But the reality that we have is that we're getting this information fundamentally on the street in an open access youth clubs for very vulnerable young people who aren't going to get parental consent. We're getting direct disclosure by virtue of the fact that they are vulnerable. We won't get parental consent, and trying to pursue it, particularly if it's an issue at home, is very risky in and of itself. So I've got quite innovative youth workers trying to find a way to get that consent. I don't know what your guys are doing with it, but obviously I just wanted to make that as a comment, also to comment that we're not the only non-profit that are experiencing it, and also to comment that at a leadership level, that becomes quite difficult for our people, because I keep having to say, no, just put it in. And in reality, what we quite often end up doing is handing it off to other statutory or public sector partners, schools and so on. So I don't know what we do with that. It's probably operational, but I just wanted to make that comment, I guess, as something that maybe is an area that could be sharpened up. The second thing I wanted to say, and I'll give you them both, is just to say that, you know, I would want to wish you every success in this kind of markets thing and trying to basically get rid of IFAs and reduce the spend. I think there's, you know, little in life makes me more upset than the idea that private equity has managed to profiteer from the care of children. And so I think the other thing to say in that is, I wonder if you would be able to find the investment from wealthy individuals and so on, and actually to consider how else you might be able to get investment if it enables you to reduce spend on IFAs. Because there's quite a lot of people who are fed up with it outside of just the councils and in the non-profit sector as well. So that's just a thought that may or may not be useful, that if it's worth picking up externally, I'm happy to discuss with you.
Alice.
I thought I had pressed it. The child death panel are quite concerned about the lack of support in bereavement terms for families when their child dies, and have all areas say they're looking to improve it. It would be helpful if everybody could continue to look at ways to improve it, because it does seem to be quite concerning. Where there is support, it seems to be months and months waiting, which isn't really very helpful if we're looking at mental well-being.
I think you're absolutely right, and certainly we've seen in a couple of serious case reviews where there has been bereavement in the background that has contributed in some way to circumstances in families leading to some tragic events, and it is fairly fragmented at the moment, and it is accessed through GPs or charitable organisations. We are commissioning specifically some services, therapeutic services for children, but I agree with you, we do need to do more systematically, and maybe that's something it is something we're picking up through the partnership, but maybe we should put more of an emphasis on that, Tina, in the plans.
Cliff.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about placements. When they go into the private sector, you were saying there were silly prices. Can you give us an idea how much more? You know, are we talking about 10% more, 100% more? Just give us a feel.
It varies. On average, a residential placement will cost us about £3,000 a week to provide for ourselves. So that's our accommodation, staffing, all the associated costs with that. an average residential placement for externally would be about 5,000, but we have gone up to 12 in some cases. In terms of an IFA, probably about £950 a week for an independent foster agency placement. Ours cost about 350, so significantly more. We have got more children in our own foster care, in our own internal provision, but you don't need a lot of children in private provision, particularly residential provision, for it to quickly stack up in terms of costs.
I've just got one question and then a couple of quick comments. Well, firstly a comment. One of the things that I think is slightly disappointing with the report, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but when I was reading it, the good stuff came out very, obviously. But as politicians and scrutiny members, we also like to see the bad stuff. And I don't think that you made, and this is a bit cruel, you didn't make enough fuss about the bad stuff that we've got. So I think if you could try and bring them out a little bit, because it has to be an open and honest report, not an attempt to sort of make everything look hunky-dory, The other thing, I mean, you are classed as a very good partnership, but if it all started to go wrong, what would the signs of that be? How would I or the public know that there was something wrong? And what are the safeguards or counterbalances to make sure that it doesn't go completely wrong? Is that a fair question? Because you're looking at me as though it isn't. If it isn't, tell me, and I'll withdraw it. It's just, I'm just wondering, because on a number of occasions when I've sat chairing these meetings, I've said to the people that have come, I don't know what a good safeguarding board looks like. I don't know what it's supposed to look like. You've got all these figures and all these facts and all these good things. I don't know whether that's good, bad, indifferent, or whatever. So the converse of that is, I'd like to know what a bad one would look like, so that I've got an idea that yours is actually a good one. Do you see the logic of that? There is logic there, so we're honest.
So actually, Chair, that is a good point. And what the Wood review around the new safeguarding partnership said is that actually there is some freedom about how we write our annual reviews in the future. So there's potential for an opportunity with the new chair, not that when David was presiding that we weren't fulfilling what our statutory responsibility is, but there might be an opportunity for us to look at how we approach it potentially differently in terms of what you're talking about. Because actually, yes, what I can assure you is that we have regular conversations amongst the safeguarding partnership around what may or may not be our concern and how we're addressing them and how we're addressing that. And from some of that is why South Yorkshire Police have launched our new neglect training, for example, so that we can spot the signs and our actions are clear. So that, I think that's an appropriate challenge and one that we can take away and think about for the report.
Just to add to that, in terms of characteristics, you would be looking at non-engagement. So are all the partners there? Are they actively involved? Is the delivery plan? So this is an annual report, but every year there's an annual work plan. Is there an agreed, collectively owned annual plan? It also talks in here about the development of a dashboard that will give us some data that says this is working well or not. So there are things you can look at. The multi-agency audit activity, is that showing that agencies are working together to protect children? So there are things that as a scrutiny committee you can look at to get assurance, data, audit activity, that you're confident in the plan, is it being delivered, that sort of thing.
Last one, Maruf.
Yeah, so this is a question about child sexual exploitation, so whoever wants to answer this is more than welcome to. I'm concerned, very concerned actually. In regards to the figures I'm seeing on page 103, in quarter one... Oh, apologies.
I think that's it. I mean, I've made a suggestion about carrying forward one or two issues that to the transitional committee. But all I can say is I think you're doing a great job. Send our thanks to your staff and the partners. And to Carly, I wish you well, because as far as I'm concerned, you've been given Mission Impossible, because they've tied one arm and one leg behind you and then said perform a miracle. So yeah, the only solution to... it's recorded anyway. The only solution is until somebody has the backbone at national level to say, yes, we need to put more money into this. Not necessarily throw it at it, but real money spent properly. And at the moment, we haven't got either, I don't think. Right, thank you for that. I don't know if you're staying. If you are, you're welcome. If not, I'm going to tell on you. Right, the sexual exploitation paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dan White. I'm going to present the last year's Sexual Exploitation Service paper. Please note it does say Amber Project on it as well, and I'll sort of make some clarifications as to why that's on there as we go through. The paper is, like I mentioned, it is last year's paper in terms of April 20 to March 22 of this year. Sorry, March 21 of last year. However, it's a request to return back to provide some information, really just to provide some reassurances of the work that continues to take place and where that work's sort of going forward. It is quite a short report. It is quite a small service, and as I mentioned, it is just to give that reassurance of the activity that is taking place. It's a multi-agency service. It always has been. There's quite a few sort of colleagues from around the various partnerships that do sit in the service. But more interestingly, what's noted in the report is that the Amber project, which is now called the Amber Service, as of this year, end of last year, the actual sexual exploitation service is embedded within that. So it means that a lot of the information coming through is probably related both to CSC and CC because they are of a similar nature. But specifically talking about the CSC element of that, the workers that are involved in the services continue to deliver over the period noted. It has been a very challenging period. During that period, they have continued to deliver training to professionals and colleagues around the city. The specialist workers continue to provide face-to-face support to all young people and didn't stop during the pandemic period. We found it was very important to keep in contact with the young people and to go out and sort of modify their practice to make sure that they were able to still engage with the young people that were being referred into the service. As noted earlier by our colleagues here, and also within the body of the report, you'll see reference to the Child Exploitation Tracker and also the multi-agency child exploitation meetings that have been established over the midpoint of last year. The service also feeds into those two areas and makes sure that it is very much present in being able to support the ongoing provision for young people and to also offer any sort of feedback and support to the colleagues who are also dealing with that particular young person. With regards to the service users profile over the period, as I mentioned, it has been a really challenging time both for operational staff and for young people. Nevertheless, we've continued to go out and continue to work with those who are referred into the service, albeit we have had a significant drop in those that have been referred into the service, and I anticipate Councillor Murray's question in terms of the numbers of referrals that it does show on the report here. It has dropped quite significantly from those that were used to in previous years, which we sort of recognised across a number of services due to the pandemic itself and the whole sort of lockdown restrictions. However, we didn't get that bounce back as things have started to lift. There is ongoing sort of scrutiny to try and identify why the lack of sort of bounce back hasn't returned the figures back to its usual numbers. one would hope it's probably because it's not happening, and the sort of support that's working with our colleagues, namely schools, other providers around the city, is such that it's been identified early enough and or support is being offered to train professionals in order to support young people to mitigate against being sort of victim to the CSE natures. You'll see the numbers that have been referred in a sort of a slight breakdown of the types of referrals that we've worked with over the period. Nothing unusual in terms of those percentages there. But again, I do reference that it is somewhat lower than we have experienced in previous years. Key achievements are listed over the period, all of which have been quite successful, I'd like to say, and the priorities that were taken forward for years 21 to 22 are still underway, albeit there is some bit of a delay in some of the items due to the ongoing restriction that we suffered, particularly over the latter part of the calendar year. Just a note as well, in fact, in terms of any future reporting, it was agreed at the last partnership board that because of the service which is now embedded within the Amber service itself, that future reports to actually come via the Amber service from the Vulnerable Young People's Board, rather than as a separate paper about CSE, because the relevancy of the nature between CSE and CCE is such that a contextual safeguarding report would far be more prudent than having something which is quite separately isolated. Willing to take any questions now from any colleagues?
I never get it wrong. From Maroof.
Yeah. So just in regards to the breakdown on page 103, I'm slightly concerned as to how you've managed, or why, maybe you can explain this in greater detail, why the amount of referrals in quarter 4 is nearly tenfold what it was in quarter 1 or quarter 2.
Yes, with the sort of lifting of restrictions, it was more cases were being provided into the safeguarding hub and then directly to us. So again, in quarter 1 to quarter 3, you could see that the trajectory of those who weren't getting access or weren't, it wasn't sort of prevalent across the city in terms of who was at risk and or exploited in regards to CSE.
Okay, so are you suggesting that that trend is going to continue for last year's report, so 2021-2022?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're working on at the moment. The Amber service is currently looking at have there been any blockages, where have we had a reduction in any specific areas from any particular types of referral agencies, and the future reports will be able to demonstrate where that, the outcomes basically of that bit of work.
Okay, the final point I want to ask is, so it says all referrals were for females. Have you ever had any referrals for males?
In the past, yes. In previous years, there have been referrals from males, albeit very small. A very low number of referrals from males tend to come through the CSE route. Those from males, unfortunately, had been recognised more as HSB, harmful sexual behaviour, which again, quite a bit of work has been done around that area to look actually, it may not necessarily have been harmful sexual behaviour, but just interpreted as such because of the nature of the
Okay, sorry, just one other question, Chair, please. Would you be able to give an idea of why there are more referrals in the age group 14 to 16 rather than 10 to 13 or 17 to 19?
I mean, that's not an unusual trend. Again, in previous years, you would find during that age range, you do get more referrals. And I think really it's around age of promiscuity, a lot more young people out and about communicate with each other, rise of social media and so forth, and experimentation would probably give rise to that percentage being quite large.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dan, for this this report. Believe it or not, some of us councillors quite like a short report. It's certainly easier to get your head around it, but that's no disrespect to Carly, because I know you're dealing with a much more complex, and Shelley, much more complex area in many ways. You talked about the bounce back in terms of referrals and the fact that in the Sheffield area there doesn't seem to have been there was a clear dip, and then there's not been the increase in referrals for child sexual exploitation. Is that mirrored in other authorities, particularly core cities? Do you have any knowledge of that? I don't have any idea whether Nottingham or Leeds or Bradford have seen a similar dip.
Not at the moment, no, but I anticipate the report that will start to collate on behalf of the Ambulance Service will indeed be able to probably recognise some of that because it will be a more encompassing report looking at exploitation in the wider sense. And as colleagues mentioned earlier, because of the nature of the partners involved, we'll probably be able to build up a bigger picture, certainly around what's happening within South Yorkshire, as the tracker itself does work with forces around South Yorkshire as part of the setting it up.
If I can just ask one more question, given that you've had less young people to help recover from their clearly traumatic experiences, has the support and treatment been more effective, given that you've been working with smaller numbers than when you've had larger numbers of referrals?
Yes, it would probably be fair to say that a lot more time would be able to be spent with those individuals because the caseloads for the staff themselves have probably been smaller than they would have been in previous years. And also the workers themselves will spend more time in sort of developing and training for themselves in order to make sure that when that bounce back does take place, they're in a greater position to be able to respond to those emerging needs.
Well, it's good to know that something good has come out of the pandemic. But thank you very much for that.
Is that it, Mike? You may not be signed in. You have to have this magic card.
Oh, hello. So I've got two-part question, but first I'd like to declare that I work with young people in one of the organisations. So the first one is, in terms of the action, the priorities that you're going forward to, the first point, which is working closely with safeguarding, in terms of the referrals, is there a percentage of these young females are out of education, like excluded in exclusion centres or homeschools or in terms of them referring, do you get referral professionally or so that's the first part of the question. The other thing is that in terms of working with Safeguarding Carbon and other agencies, is there any approach, which I know you did in the past, but is there any approach of working with grassroots organisations? Because some of these young people don't trust the system quickly, and there are a lot more exploited children out there, or young people out there who are being exploited by other young people, recruited. So is there, I do encourage you to obviously work in partnership professionally, but in terms of grassroots, for them to sort of surrender kind of some sort of information that could help your organisation because sometimes the grassroots organisations have got the trust but they don't have the professionalism sometimes, and so working in partnership sometimes could be the entire village to help out this young person that is quite lost and just feels like sometimes it's just normal what you do and just follow certain trends. So because the things that I sort of witness around Wicker in certain areas in Sheffield, it's like it's broad daylight, and it's like, does anyone even spot what's happening to these young girls or what they're doing? So, yeah, I don't know if that's a question in there, but you know what I mean.
Thank you for your questions. So with response to your first point, it's that sort of measure between not having a full detailed report as to having something quite brief. In the past, we have provided quite extensive data which does break down exactly what you've just requested before there, so which is something that we do hold, and I can certainly provide that to you if you require, where we do actually recognise if there's a trend, particularly if from referrals coming in via school, or whether more of looked after children had been in 1 year, which I then had to look at actually what particular areas were they coming from, why was it happening, what we were doing to sort of intervene. So that's not an issue. I can certainly provide that if the committee requires it. With regard to your second point, as you may know, in previous years, personally myself and colleagues have gone out to a lot of those grassroots groups to provide training to make them more aware of actually what the referral process is into the safeguarding hub. So I think there was a comment earlier from the person on the left here, which talked about either not being trusted or not understanding or what happens with those blockages, but just to give that confidence that if they do get reported on, something does happen with the information, and it's what information we can then probably give back to the referrer is where some of that sort of lack of clarity comes in at times, where you may think that nothing's actually happening, where it is, but we can't give the information back to you to say what's actually taken place. So we can continue to provide that training. There had been obviously quite a long break because of the pandemic, and also because we had the loss of an education trainer within the service itself. That's being reviewed going forward because there is, like I mentioned, a bit of a review across the entire service, and also the part of, and that's the entire service, the community youth services itself, but also part of the service, the child sexual exploitation service that sits within the AMA project. So I think, all being well, we will get to the end of this pandemic period and some things will return back to some sort of normality, and we will most definitely be going back out into working with the community groups themselves to support with the contextual safeguarding strand.
Okay, you happy with that response? As many as you like.
Sorry, I've got one more question. I'm just going to ask the entire team. Cocoon, does that come under exploitation? I know it's not sexual exploitation, but does it take to...
Yeah, I would say it is generally something that is associated with adults. So what you're talking about there is whereby a vulnerable adult is exploited by others, maybe that are county lines or involved in drug supply or for other criminality, but they use their vulnerability either as a place to use their home address from, or in order for them to commit crime. So not child safeguarding particularly. But and we do deal with that, and we'll see there are really very good examples of our neighbourhood teams working with the local authority where we would identify those vulnerable adults that are at risk, and that's when you might see closure orders or other orders, partial closure orders around addresses to stop people other than the occupants attending there to safeguard them.
So just to add to that as well, so we do have a vulnerable adults worker within the team that works with over 8 to 25. If they have any certain sort of vulnerabilities, we can go out and support them with their interventions. So in future reports, that person came into post sort of last year, so future reports will be able to demonstrate, the numbers of people that they're engaging and the types of issues that are being presented. But it doesn't necessarily focus just on cocoon, it's just that they are available to support with that age range.
I think that's the end of the questions. Anne, I do apologise.
It's already been answered actually when Dan said his bit before.
I didn't know that. Sorry, Cliff.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very simple question about the organisation. In the very first line, you say that the Sexual Exploitation Service is a co-located multi-agency service. Can you explain what it's co-located with and Just describe that, thanks.
Yeah, so it's in its original format. It's co-located just over the road at Star House and Division Street, and within the team there would be a nurse, sexual exploitation nurse, there would be police, there would be youth workers and other professionals that would support sort of the exploitation of that particular young person. But primarily those are the sort of key sort of persons that would be involved.
Right, I think that is the end of it. Thank you again for your contributions and the work that you do, because I think it's not always recognised that you're actually involved in potentially salvaging people's lives or preventing them from making a real mess of their lives. And sometimes you only get one go at it, don't you? I'm one of those that believes that you're on this earth, you get eaten by worms and that's it. You know, so I think perhaps we don't give enough credit to what your services do in terms of saving people from potential disaster, and I think we should recognise that a bit more. Other than that, I mean, the only thing I would like to ask of you is if you felt that things were becoming unmanageable, i.e. there wasn't enough of you to do what you need to do you feel confident that you could take that problem somewhere and someone would listen to you? Anybody? Anybody?
So, as Dan mentions, we do have police officers that form part of the AMBER service, and we regularly review what professionals we have got and with what skills and abilities within the teams. So absolutely, I can say from within policing, that would be raised to me and to more senior levels if needs be, and we are looking at what our provision looks like now.
And just to add, I think some of you are probably aware of the community youth services, which is now established within the council, was promised an injection of investments. And one of the outcomes of that is to actually look at the staffing and is there enough in sufficient areas to deal with, you know, potential increases in exploitation, for example, and intervention with young people. So it is something that's certainly being considered now in preparation for the outcome of that review.
You're telling me you wouldn't be nervous about raising it as an issue?
Personally, I wouldn't be, no. I guess that's why I've been doing the job I've been doing previously, but certainly, yeah.
The reason I'm asking, and I will shut up now, is we are in this room, we're all acutely aware that over the last 10 years or so, what we've done is ask fewer people to do more. And there comes a point where that cannot be done. And I want some reassurance from the people at the sharp end that if they feel that they are being asked to do too much, they're confident to say, excuse me, but I need a bit of help here. And I think what I'm hearing is yes. Okay, right, thank you very much for that. That's been, you can stay if you wish, don't have to. Have you? Okay, well, we'll just let you leave the room and then we'll carry on, okay? Thank you. Speak to this one.
A fairly simple request, page 105, is for you to approve as a committee the recommendations that will come from this committee to, whilst we're in this kind of current process this last year, the cooperative executive, and it's what's on 106, and it's a reflection of the issues that the young people raised when they came back to this committee last year. 4 key points, and I have shared these with Youth Cabinet and they've made a few points, so they do reflect not only, I think, the points that you raised that day, but also what the young people would like your support in recommending. So it's over to you really, whether it's okay or you want to add anything.
Just in the mental health isolation and closures, can we sometimes have a view from the young carers about the impact that COVID has had on them? Because it must have been more difficult to be caring for someone and trying to do your schoolwork and coping with the whole lockdown experience, I would think.
That's a very fair point, Alice. I think that's an omission by accident because we didn't have anyone on the panel who was experiencing that sort of situation. If somebody on the panel with the kids sat there had that, I'm sure that would have come out. So I'm not quite sure how to deal with a very valid point. It might be a little bit too late or too cumbersome to add it to that report, but I think we need to discuss it somewhere. And Alice has got her finger poised because she's going to have a light bulb moment, aren't you?
Yeah, maybe. I think on that, on a very sort of practical point, I'll make sure that the language around these recommendations makes it clear it's from the Youth Cabinet and not everyone. I do know, I'll talk to my colleagues as well because I have a feeling that there might have been some connections in with carers recently. But also we have I can't remember what its actual phrase is, but there is a grouping of young carers and officers who support that. So I can be in touch with them to see if there's a way of doing this without coming to a meeting and just potentially adding in and just posing that question, sending it back saying that it was raised by this committee. Would love a bit of an input. Yeah, funny one this really, because you only have one more meeting left, kind of ever, or at least for the next 10 years. Sorry, but you know, that's the way it is next year with the new committee system. But what I've tried to do is hopefully you've caught up with the main things that you wanted to, or a big chunk of the main things you wanted to this year, and you've got, as I say, one last meeting scheduled on the 9th of March, and a number of items I'm trying to pursue for you to make sure there's some, there's somebody here with a bit of an update on those. So you've definitely got review of early help services, which was delayed back from December. I am following up something around Sheffield inclusion strategy. I'm also very conscious of the ask around youth services. And I think, as Dan White has mentioned, there's a little bit of a change and a bit of a new service. So, I'm pursuing these for you. It could mean quite a hefty agenda on the 9th of March. I'm not sure that at this point in time there's much scope for putting in an additional meeting. And I'm not even going to look at John as I say that. But, let's see what we can do for the agenda on the 9th of March. And actually, Chair, your suggestion of an item that's almost like a handover recommendation to whatever committee it is next year would help with some of this as well. And, I think that the answer to that is a bit of a report where I can put in what I see as some of those big issues, potentially share that with you beforehand and turn that into quite a useful item for a legacy of this committee and forwarding on.
Yeah. Sounds good. Okay, everybody happy with that? You don't look it. Next meeting, 9th of March. And I think that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed.